Mr. Harvey, they're ready to take you live whenever you are, and you're about 1 minute off from 7 o'clock. So whenever you guys are ready to start your meeting, you're good to go.
Great. I'm going to let John take it away here.
Well, let me call the meeting to order. And is there a Zoom orientation, Leroy, that you're going to do, or? You're muted.
I can provide a quick orientation. This is Stephen Debus, and I help with the technology here at Meridian Township. And for anybody who's running the Zoom client, as you float the mouse over the Zoom window, if you're running on a PC, it should cause a toolbar to appear at the bottom of the screen. The most important functions on that toolbar are normally at the far left, which is a mute. You're able to mute yourself. We encourage people to do that if they're not talking, because sometimes you'll have errant sounds as you flip through pages or drink water or squeeze a plastic bottle, and those will drown out the person who's actually speaking. So if you mute yourself when you're not speaking, it helps everyone hear the other people. And if you need to start and stop your video, that's the other button that is on the far left side of that screen if you needed to do that. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact me directly. 517-853-4222 is my direct desk telephone number. But for the purpose of public comments at this meeting tonight, the telephone number we're going to use, you can see in the bottom of my nameplate, 517-349-1232. When you get to that part of your meeting, we'll allow people to call in to make public comments, and or if you're comfortable doing it, we can take it via the Zoom interface as well, which we'll do with the raise hand feature, which Mr. Harvey and I will facilitate. If there's any questions or concerns, I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you very much. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Is there anyone who would like to add anything to the agenda?
Move adoption as presented.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, then we move on to our green themes presentation. It's
Mr. Sarver?
Yep.
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but most of the boards and commissions are actually doing at least a hand vote, raise of hands.
Okay.
Because it's hard to tell who's saying yes and or nay in terms of whatever else, or an actual roll call vote if there's money involved.
Yes. Let's see.
And you don't have to raise your hand via the interface. You can just raise your hand in front of the camera, and
okay.
That's more than good enough to say, okay, we can see who raised their hand.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Okay, it's my pleasure to, isn't this technology wonderful? It's my pleasure to announce Bob Chapman, who's going to be our green themes presenter tonight. Bob and I have been working together over 30 years. In fact, both of us have probably forgotten how long it's been on energy efficiency and renewable energy policies and programs. And Bob, for many, many years, was the executive director of Warm Training Center in Detroit. And then after retiring from that, he couldn't stay inactive, so he became executive director of Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, that probably everybody here has kind of heard of. And, you know, there has been talk about a RFP for a power purchase agreement. And I thought it would be useful to have Bob, who's not a developer, who has no business interest in this, but has some familiarity and experience with it, just basically give us an overview and give us a chance to ask some questions and, you know, have a better understanding of the basic concept. So with that, Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's and congratulations to the group, because I'm thinking about these kinds of things. That it's important, and it's a different way of doing business. Leroy, did you have the PowerPoint? Were you able to put it up? I have just a few slides that I put together for an introduction. I'll be pretty quick so that we could have some time for questions if the PowerPoint comes up. And that's about the third or fourth slide. So I don't know if you can start it. Yeah, thank you. That's great. You can go right to the next one. I guess I want to start off by saying that a power purchase agreement is nothing new. They're been around for a long time. With part of Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, we got involved with them because it was a very good vehicle for a number of houses of worship around the country had been using this model. The other thing I want to say before we get into how they work and things like that is there really are a variety of sizes of power purchase agreements. Some of them are really pretty small, like a 20 kW. Some of them are quite big. You see some of those wind farms along the going up 27. Consumers or DT don't own all of those. In some cases, they're owned by a separate corporation, which has a power purchase agreement with the utility to sell that power. But let's just start. I start with the idea that what this is about is right relationship, because it isn't a simple economic transaction, although it can be, and it can be very mutually beneficial transaction. But I come at it, and a lot of us come at it from the standpoint of a right relationship with the land and with people that we share the earth with. So the next slide, where it says it starts with why, and I've eliminated the number of slides that I have in here around things like climate change, because I don't think I have to preach to this choir. But it's about leadership by example. There are certainly public health benefits to not having the pollution. There's environmental benefits, and then there's actually savings on energy costs in the long run. So it's kind of a win-win-win if it's done right, and if it isn't a right agreement for both parties, then it isn't getting done right. But when it is done right, a power purchase agreement can be one tool in the toolbox of a corporation, of a business, of a house of worship, or a municipality to address their power needs in an environmentally responsible way. You can go to the next slide. So basically, a power purchase agreement is simply an agreement between a building owner and an investor, where an investor will put up, in this mostly it's solar, occasionally it could be wind, but will put up a solar array onto the building that the building owner owns, and then the building owner uses that power from the on-site panels, and the investor who put the solar array up, they're basically charging the building owner for that power. Eventually, the building owner could wind up owning the system if they want, which is common, but it's also for the bigger systems. Sometimes the building owner, for whatever reason, because they're a municipality and they don't want to be bothered, or the house of worship that doesn't want to own it, the investor could continue to own the system. So what you have there is the host pays the investor for the electricity that they generate at an agreed upon rate. That's one of the phrases I'd like you to zoom in on. And we're going to be coming back to this idea about where the flexibility with power purchase agreements are, why and when it's a good thing, when it might not be as good of a thing for a municipality or for a nonprofit. The benefits of a PPA to the building owner is that, first of all, they're getting renewable energy. They know that they're powering their system, their building with renewable energy. Often it's not up to 100%. Often it might be 70, 80%. And if we have time, we'll get to the reasons why it doesn't make sense sometimes to go to try to max out your energy. Very limited risk. The investor owns those panels and is responsible for any maintenance. Fortunately, there's no moving parts in solar panels, so there's often almost no maintenance. This is a big one. This next one about the federal tax credits. A lot of you have probably heard and read about federal tax credits. If you're a nonprofit or if you're a municipality, you're not paying federal taxes, income taxes, then you don't get that credit. And so a power purchase agreement, the agreements were set up in some ways so that people could still get the benefit of that 30, which it was 30%. It's dropping down to 25, I think, next year. So that the overall project cost can be brought down and the overall amount that you pay for your energy can be brought down by getting those federal tax credits. There are no state tax credits. So the only way you're going to get this is if you do it this way, where the investor is able to grab the tax credit and pass those savings on to the building owner. Now I put in here immediate energy savings. This is where you get into some flexible terms, and I don't want to get too deep into this, but it can result in immediate savings because the investor might charge you less from day one than the utility would. So you could start off by paying less. In other cases, you might pay the same as the utility rate. Depending on how fast you wanted the payback to be, you could wind up paying a little bit more. But the next bullet point is really important, which is your cost per kilowatt is locked in. By the way, I apologize if I'm going too fast, but we'll come back and have questions and you'll see this again. Your cost per kilowatt is locked into the contract over the course of the contract. So where with a utility might get a rate increase and you don't have any control over that and pass that rate increase on to you. With a power purchase agreement, the investor is guaranteeing you that they will only be charging X amount of for the rate. The rate is locked in over the course of time, so you have control in terms of budgeting about how much you're going to be paying for your utilities for the period of time for the amount of energy that you bought. And as I said, the power purchase agreements can be structured so that the building owner could own the panels after a payback period, in which case it's pretty much free energy. Many arrangements like this go 15 years to anywhere from 5 to 20 years. 15 years is not uncommon, but the life of those panels is easily 30 or 35. They're warranted for 25. So if you pay the system off, after that, you basically are getting free, almost free power. So what about the benefit to the investor then? Why is the investor getting into this? That would be the next slide. Well, in some investors, it's socially responsible investing. So clean, renewable energy, and that's the case in my case. For example, as you'll see, I was an investor for a house of worship, and I view it as just a form of socially responsible investing. The investor takes advantage of those 30% tax credits and also depreciation. It's a low risk investment with a predictable rate of return. And when I did it, some people looked askance at me at having a low rate of return, but that low rate of return looks really good after what the stock market did this last year. And it's an ongoing revenue source. It's just a constant, you bill for the power that gets produced. So that's basically for the investor. It's a fairly safe investment because you're generating power and you've already got a contract that you're going to get paid for the power that you generate over a period of time. You go down to the next slide real quickly. I'll get past these next two kind of quickly, but this is St. Peter's Church in Detroit across from the Old Tiger Stadium. And That's my lovely wife on the left, and that's the pastor, Denise, on the right, and that's me holding. We put up an array of solar panels, and we were the investor for St. Peter's. And go down to the next slide. This was a small, so it was basically a small 11 kW system. They're often around 20 kW. After 20, the utilities take exception to you and might make you jump through extra hoops. But you can see what happened here, that we put up the initial cost. The parish was very small. They wouldn't have been able to do this themselves. We put up the initial cost, but we then got that 30% tax credit off of our income taxes. So that's a tax credit, not a deduction. So it was an immediate savings for us. We also are able in the first 2 years to get the depreciation. So basically, let me put it this way, for a private investor to do a system like this, you get back about 40% of your investment within the first 2 or 3 years. At the same time, St. Peter's started saving even in the very first year because we simply charged a lower rate than the utility, and we locked in the savings for St. Peter's compared to DTE, so that they'll save by the 14th, 15th year, they'll be saving about $3,000 a year. And that'll turn out to be a savings of about $40,000. The system will be paid for in about 15 years, I believe it is. And after that, St. Peter's will own the system. You can go to the next slide. Well, that's so we bill St. Peter's there's an app for that. I think the meme for the 21st century is there's an app for that. There's an app that shows St. Peter's and us how much those panels produce. That's you bill to St. Peter's, and then actually we're not billing every month. We bill like once a quarter, and we chose that rate of return. It's very common in most cases for people to have investors to have a higher rate of return, and that's still a very reasonable rate, and the building owner still really makes out. But hey, that's my church. You can go down to the next slide. There's this is a nice little, if you can see it all and read it all on your screens, I hope you can. This basically shows schematically how this thing works. The investor puts up the panels on the host's building, right? And the investor takes care of puts all the money up front, monitors the system, only bills for power that is produced. And this did happen, and it was my fault that there was something happened with the system that it was producing power, but it didn't relay the power, it didn't show it. And the St. Peter's didn't pay for any energy that month because our system didn't show the power being done. The host receives the power, pays the host for the power at that reduced rate. And here's an important thing. Any excess power goes back into the grid. So the utility is basically being our storage. And we got in under the wire, so we're getting true net metering. So the host is getting their power basically stored at net metering, and they get a lower bill from DT as well. Not only for the fact that we're generating some of the power, but also the power that they generated, they're getting credits for any excess power during the summer that they didn't need to use. Okay, go down to the next one. This one is what I'm want to stress to you, is that there's a lot of flexibility both for the investor and for the building owner. You have all kinds of flexibility about what kind of length of time the power purchase agreement would be for. The rate is mutually agreed upon. That word escalator means that, for example, if you assume a utility might be having, if you look at the last 25 years, maybe their power went up, costs went up by 5 or 6% a year, you build in an escalator. In our case, we build in a lower escalator so that the church will be paying less, actually, as each year goes by. So you have a lot of flexibility about how this goes, and you can talk to various investors and and make a good deal. We're almost done. So before I get to any questions, there was one thing that I really wanted to stress in all of this. I mean, a power purchase agreement is it can be a really good deal, but it's another way of buying power, right? And usually it's cheaper than buying it from the utility, and it can be a very and you're getting renewable energy, and that's good. But this idea, we can't solve problems using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. We're not going to just out-tech ourselves out of these problems of our energy needs and issues of global warming and global crisis. So municipalities, individuals, businesses, we're going to have to change the way that we do business and the way that we do our lives if we're going to have a more climate-friendly world. So I always started right at the beginning of my career and have continued to focus on this, and Michigan Interfaith Power and Light. Energy efficiency comes first. The best kilowatts are the ones you didn't have to use. And I would absolutely stress that you do everything you can, which I'm sure you already are, of not of having as low of energy draw as possible before you start thinking about solar or wind or other renewables or geothermal or anything else. I know I raced through this, but I wanted to do that because power purchase agreements are just one tool in a toolbox, and they can be a good thing for a small business, for a nonprofit, and they can be a good thing for very large companies. There are, by the way, in terms of nonprofits, there are schools that have gone to this. They've got these big old flat roofs, and they put solar arrays on them. And during the summer, they're generating a lot of power, and that they are getting credit for from a utility. And then they're they're getting that, using that during the winter for credits. So there's a lot of variations, but basically, it's not a bizarre thing. It's being done around the country, and for small businesses or nonprofits as well as large. I'm going to stop right there. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope this can be. I hope I didn't bore you with things you already knew about. If there's any questions, I could take them.
So, remind me, John, whether this is something that we're thinking of proposing to township government, or if we're thinking more of citizens or other businesses or organizations in the township for promotion. What's your thinking on that?
Yes, both is true. There has been some talk about, for our major buildings, the major buildings for the township, and maybe separately for the water treatment plant, to do an RFP for a power purchase agreement. In addition to, it appears like we're going to be able to retain the $100,000 for our on-site township-owned PV arrays. And as I think all of you know, we're looking at the farmers market now and potentially a second building, maybe the South Fire Station. But Leroy, you may be able to kind of clarify, has a decision been made to put out an RFP?
Yeah, definitely there's an RFP in the works, but the main focus right now is to get something on the farmers market and, the smaller project. Maybe Courtney can, Phil can chime in on that, but there's also interest in further learning about PPAs. There's certainly interest from some investors and contractors into doing a larger system. And to reach our goals of renewable energy supply, I think that will be one of the kind of the key tools that we consider using.
And I think our primary focus or interest was the municipal buildings, but certainly this is an approach that could apply to any nonprofit, church, school, and everybody here on the Zoom has relationships. So this is a concept too that might be helpful to a church you belong to or a nonprofit you belong to. So we had kind of two purposes to asking Bob to kind of share this information. And for churches, Michigan Interfaith Power and Light is available, I understand it, to kind of assist churches, kind of walk them through this process. I see Bob shaking his head, yes?
And you have some excellent examples right up in your neighborhood. Eastwood, they didn't do a United UCC church. They didn't do a PPA because they didn't have to. They basically self-funded theirs. But we've created recently a really good template. So for a small group like a house of worship, we have the legal documents that work really well. And whether it's an individual investor or multiple investors, we just created the template for multiple investors to do a PPA. So yeah, Michigan IPL has some really good resources, some of which are right on their website now that you could, solar resources.
Yeah, one thing that's been happening in Michigan, which is a really marvelous development, is that, the big solar developers, the private developers, they're looking at 1 megawatt, 5 megawatts, 20 megawatts. And so, which is fine in a number of situations, but, for a lot of nonprofits, churches, and local governments, it's hard for them to attract an interest of a big solar developer. So Bob and others have been working on models that basically would make this approach available for smaller systems, a lot of them under 20 kilowatts. But I know in our situation with the township, in some preliminary discussions, because Leroy mentioned that there were two developers that kind of responded to the initial RFP with the idea maybe we should do one of these PPA approaches. We were talking about 500, 600 kilowatts, which would achieve our goal of, getting us a long ways to our 100% renewable energy for our township building. But let me ask anybody in the audience too, are there any questions about the process or concept that Bob's been talking about? Ned, go ahead, or Courtney, go ahead.
I'm guessing it's me, Courtney. I don't know if Courtney was an excuse on here, but it's not really a question about the PPA. It's more about the solar energy in general. More of a concern. What happens with the solar panels after the 25 to 30 years? Are they just trashed, or is there a way to recycle them, or like what happens with that? Do they have to go through the same process again?
Sure. It's funny, the solar business there are panels that are still operating after 40 years. So there's not a lot of experience with recycling solar panels yet because of the energy, but there would have to be some of the materials can be recycled, but frankly, there isn't that much experience yet. Because they last as long as they last. So I wouldn't want to try to give you some kind of an authoritative answer. The bigger issue really has to do with the roof, right? If your roof was not going to be lasting another 35 or 40 years. What do you do? And there are ways of working around the panels because the roofs often don't get degraded as much because the panels, I talked to a roofer that they've found that the panels protect the roof because it's the UV rays that really beat up a roof, not the rain. And they've actually been able to move, cut around and not have to spend as much for roofing. The panels can come down and be put back up if need be for if a roof had to be replaced. But the recycling is a good example of something that they know that some parts can be recycled. And as we're learning, the recycle business is one that's also got to grow, and we've got a lot to learn about.
I was surprised. I was down at the University of Michigan Hospital for an MRI, and kind of waiting to get in line. And I was chatting with this guy, and we started talking about what we're doing. And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm in the recycling business." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I've been working on solar energy and whatever." And he said, "Oh yeah, we started recycling solar panels." I said, "Really? You are?" Because again, they last so long. I didn't think, at least in our area, that they had actually started up recycling. So I asked him, "Now, where are you from?" He said, "Oh, I'm from Mason." And I said, "You're recycling solar panels in Mason, south of Lansing?" He said, "No, not yet, but we are recycling them. We're shipping them to a facility in Ohio because we're an outfit that works throughout the Midwest." So I was actually kind of surprised that it's already happening in our area, because I've read about Germany. Germany has so many solar panels that they have, they've built facilities specifically just to recycle solar panels. So it can be done. It's like any sort of recycling, which Leroy can talk about, right? Economies of scale are important. But panels do have a lot of valuable materials.
I really appreciate the question because it's kind of what I meant about, it's an example of, we're not just going to out-tech or think that there's some silver bullet that has no downside, that is just there. It's true, it's way better than coal-generated electricity and natural gas electricity, and it's not putting out anything into the atmosphere, but I would hate to pretend that there's no downside. There's a downside to pretty much anything.
I think, Ned, you had a question, right?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. One was sort of along the same lines. Solar panels vary, of course, and as the technology evolves, the chemistry evolves, and the older solar panels were basically made of silicon, which is pretty recyclable. I mean, it's the challenge in the first place is making the super pure silicon to make these things, but it's pretty easy to, if not fully recycle, at least to dispose of silicon because it's basically what becomes sand. But my question was, I've read that as more and more solar panels are being put in place, utilities are upping the connection costs. And so what do we know about the prospects of things ending up costing a lot more, not in terms of formal rate costs, but in terms of the cost of being attached to the grid?
I can only tell you real quickly that that's one of the factors. What state you live in, what utility you have is going to be part of the financial picture about whether or not it's going to be cost effective. There are other states that have been a lot more solar friendly than Michigan. And so they've got a way bigger solar footprint because of that. But the good thing is that once you lock something in, it's locked in, so that, like with net metering, when the utilities change to get away from true net metering, they grandmothered or grandfathered your rates in. So I think you could look to utilities to try to. They like solar panels. They like solar energy if they can own it.
Right.
They ain't such a big fan if they don't own it and they're not getting the revenue from it.
Well, we need to move the agenda along too, but I guess we have time for at least one or two more questions. Any takers? Okay, well, hey, thank you, Bob. We really
absolutely.
appreciate it.
I do have one more question, actually.
Go ahead.
So I've heard that firefighters hate these things. That apparently because they occlude the roof, they block access, in the event of a fire. So what is that? Does that?
I'm sorry, did you say they block access?
Yeah.
Oh,
and
you mean the
also-
panels on the roof?
Yeah, and also that in principle, if you get them hot enough, the panels themselves could be quite flammable, although you got to really work hard to get them going. But does that have an impact on insurance, for example, for a house or for an institution of any sort?
I actually put up panels a few years before I did this. So I've had solar panels on my roof on my own personal, on my house for about 5 years now. That was extremely negligible. There was no real increase to my cost. So at St. Peter's, there was it was like $25 a year. That it was like almost nothing to their cost. There is all kinds of interlock. The utility is extremely aware of the fact that the panels are there. There's a locking mechanism so that there's no danger to utility workers, that power could go from there up to a line that they thought was dead. I hadn't heard the fire issue, and I've never heard of a solar panel. I can't even think of anything that would be flammable there.
The building codes state in Michigan, and actually a lot of states now, most states probably, they have a provision that you can't have the panels go right up to the edge of the roof. The reason being that then the firefighters have a place to walk, so they don't have to walk on the panels themselves. Because the issue is obviously getting access to the attic or through the roof. So the building codes have accommodated kind of at least that concern of the firefighters.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Any time for one more question, I think. Anybody want to? Okay. Hey, thank you. Thanks again, Bob.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
And let's see, we're moving on to approval of the minutes. Are there any additions, corrections that anybody would like to propose? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, a second. Okay, we got 3 seconds. Okay, all in favor, raise your hand, please. Okay, looks good. Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Whoops, just lost my agenda. Public remarks. Is there anybody in the public that would like to talk?
And we can accommodate public remarks 2 different ways. Number one, if someone wanted to dial 517-349-1232, we can accept telephone calls, 517-349-1232, or anybody who's participating in the attendee portion of the Zoom meeting should have a raised hand button on their toolbar. And if they wanted to make a comment, they could raise their hand and then we can enable them to speak as well. That telephone number, 517-349-1232. I'm seeing no hands. I'm hearing no calls. If that changes, I'll let you know.
Thank you. And we do have an opportunity for public remarks at the end of the meeting. So if anybody's out there watching, you'll have another chance at the end of the meeting. And let's see, that brings us down to new business commissioner application. I think we all received with Kirk resigning from the board, we have a vacancy. And I think everybody probably has seen the application from Tom Frazier, who from my perspective has a great background and would add some knowledge and diversity to the board. But let me ask Leroy, am I right? Is Tom the only person at this point that is kind of on the list of possible candidates?
Yeah, I've checked with all the other former applicants. We haven't had a lot lately. I think Courtney was our most recent applicant, which we approved. And yeah, Tom was either people had job issues or family commitments and we're not able to continue. But yeah, Tom is definitely interested, and he's the only one so far that we've received from my last update at the clerk's office.
Thank you, Leroy. And would anybody like to have a comment on Tom's application or any thoughts about?
Yeah, I was never very proactive in terms of recommending applicants to the township board, to the supervisor. I'm not sure why, but it does seem as if a recommendation from the Environmental Commission can help focus the township board and the supervisor on a particular applicant and on filling out the commission in general. So I think I would urge that we support an applicant. My understanding is that Tom has expressed interest for quite a while. And my understanding of his interests and background is that very relevant. And so my inclination would be to support that application in an informal communication from our chair to the supervisor.
Okay, now let me just get a sense for the our environmental commission here. If you think Tom would be a good addition to the our commission, why don't you raise your hand? Okay, it seems like, and I guess I've got a question for Courtney from the board. You know, is it appropriate for me to send an email, a memo to Mr. Stajka, or is it maybe a better process for you just to communicate to the board our interest and support? Would it be a better process?
John, I think it'd be appropriate either way, but if you want to send me his information, I can certainly make sure that Supervisor Stajka gets it and I can follow up with him as well.
Okay. Is that
Leroy?
It's marvelous having a board member as a liaison to our commission. So I think that's, to me, a pretty appropriate way to go, unless people have some other thoughts about it.
Just briefly, in talking with Michelle Prince, she thought if we just prepare a small resolution and she can help prepare that, and if Courtney can be our spokesperson, that would be great. And I'd be happy to run that draft by you and Courtney, John, if you like.
Sounds good. Okay, moving on to old business. Leroy, do you have an update for us about the Township Board meeting presentation? That would have been about our update about our climate sustainability plan, our PA potential ordinance for driveway sealants, our climate emergency resolution.
No, I don't. Usually the board agendas are prepared a week or two in advance. Maybe Courtney has an update. I know we talked about doing a brief presentation earlier in the year, and that sort of got put on hold due to obvious circumstances. But Courtney, do you have a sense of when you might have space on your agenda, or we're still interested in sharing an update at some point, and a couple of us would be involved with that brief presentation?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I did email Supervisor Stajka, and I'll have to look back. I may have missed an email back. Our agenda has not been exceptionally full lately, so I would expect that it wouldn't be a problem at all. I will follow up with him and find out what would be a good date. Are you ready to present, as soon as it's available?
Yeah, we just need a couple hours notice, and
you do better than I do.
no,
okay, yeah. All right, I will make sure. I'll follow up with him right now, as a matter of fact.
Is anybody else? I think we talked about John, maybe Ned and Susan, I forget if it was Ned or Susan, talking about the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and the coal tar ban. John had talked about the climate action plan. Bill, were you gonna say anything or part of that trio discussion?
Not if I can help it.
Okay. Okay, and I'll be there.
I think later in our agenda, we'll come across some issues that we should think about whether they are ready for prime time. Some of the things coming from the tree sustainable building and planning are ideas that are bubbling up, but if they're too premature, I wouldn't want to put them in front of the board too early.
Great. Thank you for being here, Courtney.
Okay, we're moving on to the chair's report, and oh, Rose.
So I don't know. I just had a topic that I wanted to bring up for new business, just because that seems like where this would fit in the agenda, and it's kind of a big one. I'm opening up a can of worms here, but just been thinking a lot about what's going on in the world right now. So kind of in light of all these recent events, I wonder if the commission has ever tackled the idea of sustainability and racial inequality, and whether or not that's something we ought to think about a little bit. I mean, environmental racism is a thing. Climate change disproportionately affects people of color. Just, I don't really know where I'm going with this. I just feel like it's something that if ever there was a time to bring it up, right now is that time.
Yeah, I would strongly support that. When I think back on our climate sustainability action plan, those issues were not central, if even raised. Our green space plan doesn't contemplate those issues at all. And that seems like a perfectly appropriate direction for us to go. I'm not sure how that would happen. My immediate thought is that we tend to have a bit of a blind spot in the township about multifamily housing. And every time I hear the statistics on it, it kind of reopens my eyes. And the subject kind of mainly comes up around in access, for example, to recycling services, which we know that Leroy and others have been working on for many, many years. But certainly, I don't recall that being a central issue even an issue in township environmental commission deliberations. And
I wonder too if, because this is kind of a new issue for us, Rose, if you have something specific you would like to have us investigate or at least think about, one thing we could do is, you've raised the issue, we can put it on the agenda for the next meeting and give us some time between now and then to kind of think a little about it and in what we might be able to do, because this is kind of a, I think everybody here appreciates the issue. What to do about it is not so clear to me. So is that okay, or do you want to discuss it further tonight?
No, absolutely. It's just something I've been turning over in my own mind. And I mean, I think that there's several different ways we could go. There's many improvements we could make. So I think it'd be great if everybody just thought it over and we came back together on it next time.
Rose?
Courtney from the board.
Rose, thank you for bringing this up. I think it's really important. And, you know, we live in Meridian Township and we don't necessarily see some of these injustices up front, but we know they're happening. The governor has just set a new environmental justice advocacy. So there's an advocate that works directly for the governor. I know her, and I bet I could get us set up with maybe a half-hour meeting and just chat through what maybe their objectives are and some of your ideas, and she might be able to add to some of your you know, your thoughts and maybe clarify what we want to do or need to do, or, you know, something we could, I guess, complement. if that's something you'd like.
Yeah, I'd love it. I would be happy to sit down and talk with that person.
And I'd be happy to join in that conversation too.
Yeah, so would I. I've been kind of focused. I've followed the COVID and I've got like a gazillion spreadsheets, etc. But one of the things is recognizing the effect of racial inequality on the impacts of COVID. And it would be really interesting to get maybe somebody from Ingham County Public Health, because in their mapping, and this is just my interpretation of the hotspot on terms of the mapping in Meridian Township, it appears to be tied, not surprisingly, to multi-family housing. And that is also tied to racial inequality. Now, I can't tie it exactly. It's just from kind of looking at where the hotspots are, following all of the weekly updates from Ingham County Health Department. But I mean, all of that is tied together in terms of, and we know that there's a significant impact of racial and economic inequality on, and the multi-stressors on the impact of COVID-19.
Susan, are those data that are easily accessible or that can be easily shared? I mean, I follow the Michigan aggregate data, and I see that people are analyzing at a finer grain, but
yeah, I'll send anybody or I'll just send it out to the group. Basically, I'll send you the link. I've got the PowerPoints that I've been downloading, and I'll send you the direct link from the Ingham County Health Department. They do weekly updates on Friday, and they've just started doing a little bit finer grain analysis on GIS to locate that you can see the hotspots. And just knowing enough about Meridian Township, I can figure out where the hotspots essentially are.
Gotcha. I'd be very interested in seeing that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Okay, good. It looks like we can have a conversation between now and the next meeting. And Leroy, why don't you make sure we get it on the agenda for the next meeting? And we're up to the chair's report.
Sounds
I
good.
don't have anything to kind of share or talk about at this point, which leads me to the staff report. Leroy, you're on.
Oh, thanks. I briefly have been working with several citizen groups and the tree team, the building policy study group, we have a green network now that meets on Wednesday mornings. Some of you have been at those discussions. It's open to anybody who wants to talk about issues. One of those issues came up yesterday, this idea of the environment youth and adults in their community. And just to harken back to this concept of community involvement, community justice, the environmental projects are a great way to build investment in our community and engage citizens and youth in creative ways. So there's a connection there that I think is maybe we don't always think about, but it was exciting to talk about it with our little green network group. And we'll get an update on the energy team in a few minutes. I spoke a little bit about our successful endeavor at the farmers market a couple weeks ago, distributing 64 trees as part of our tree initiative. And we'll talk about the tree team in a minute, but I think we see some real possibilities for that farmers market as a vehicle to do more with this tree initiative than we had originally planned. The rain garden at the Hidden River Rain Garden at Park Lake and Bircham is starting to perk up. And I got a call from a resident today, in fact, about, okay, what are we going to do now? We've got weeds and we've got some, how are we going to maintain this thing? And our township staff is busy as they can possibly be, just keeping up with lawns. And so how do we engage neighbors in maintaining this rain garden that is starting to blossom? It's doing pretty well. So I might be talking to some of you in that neighborhood, John. There's several neighborhoods, including Bircham Hills Retirement Center, that are close to that. If you want to get involved, let me know. The solar garden that we planted last year is starting to also perk up. It's really going to be a showpiece. We have folks from Luke Landscape that are helping with some of the watering and the growing there. So take a look when you go by the municipal building. We're not sure what's going to happen with the September recycling event. At least one of our vendors is backed out, not going to be doing paint recycling, but we expect a big crowd, so we're hoping to pull that off in a COVID-friendly manner. We'll be meeting over the summer to continue to plan that. That's probably enough for now, but I'll share some of this in the minutes. If you have questions, let me know about any of this stuff or suggestions, because it's all kind of a moving target, but it's a fun job and I'm enjoying being here. Thanks for being a part of my fun life.
Thank you, Leroy. We're on to the work group reports. The first one is brownfield redevelopment, which I think is you, Ned, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we met last week in the in a 1 week delayed BRA meeting, and the main thing that we discussed was the proposal for updating and quote unquote improvement of the marathon station that's on the corner of Marsh Road and Hazlitt Road, the southeast corner. The plan there is to, first of all, to basically restructure the facility to have pumps in behind the building, and the building that's a convenience store and so forth. And it's not really our province to analyze the design of the plan, but simply to review the financing as arranged and so forth. And although in a personal sense, I would like to see a more integrated program of rejuvenating that whole area, the plans that they propose and the tax increment funding that they hope to be paid back by all sounded reasonable, and so the proposal was agreed upon by the BRA. The design is going to place is going to bring the storefront, so to speak, more toward the actual corner, and as I said, put the pumps behind it. And they're also going to have the ability to work on cars, so they'll have a garage there that they can do repairs on and so forth. It turns out that the place, which I hadn't been aware of, the place had actually had a leak, an underground storage tank leak. I think I'm forgetting now, it's something like 14 years ago, but that was mitigated and fixed as far as any further leaks go. And so that is no longer an issue. Frank Walsh was very enthusiastic about the plan, of course, both because he's interested in economic development and because he had gone to another station that had also been developed by the same owner and developer, and he said this place was the cleanest gas station he's ever been to. So that was an interesting comment. Anyway, so that's the story. That was the subject of the meeting, and that's the broadly speaking, the current plan.
Ned, are they addressing the contamination? At least as I recall, there's contamination across the street.
You mean over on the east side? I mean, on the west side of the street? or the north side? Is there,
Over closer to where the Big B is, that corner right there.
oh, the northeast
So
corner.
yeah,
That, no, that wasn't discussed at all. And the profile of the sampling wells that they looked at didn't, they didn't go across the street at all.
okay, because as I recall back years ago when we did this is going back to when we did the 495 capstone design project, that there was contamination.
Well, I wouldn't be
I think
surprised by
the
that.
dry cleaner that was across
Yeah,
the street,
right,
but
it was a
that's I'm basing on totally on memory from quite a few years ago.
Yeah, I have no trouble believing that there's that there would be contamination across the street where the dry cleaner had been, but that's not part of the property that was being
Okay.
that belongs to this developer. However, the one thing that did sort of emerge from the discussion in looking at the borings and so forth is that this particular area, on a positive note, sort of in contrast to downtown Okemos discussions, it doesn't look like there's a lot of groundwater motion. So where the leak had happened has stayed pretty localized according to the borings, which sort of makes sense. I mean, it's a pretty flat part of the world, but you never know what groundwater is doing. So in that sense, it appeared that they were able to establish a fairly well-defined boundary, and to the extent that they're going to have to remove any contaminated soils, it's a relatively small amount. I don't think it's going to be quite the size of operation that they had to confront in Okemos.
Thank you, Ned.
Thanks.
On to the energy team. I'll give you a brief update. The Michigan solar stories on Zoom continue. We've done 5 so far. 4 of those are Meridian Township, and the series is going to continue as long as there's interest on the part of storytellers and people wanting to hear the stories. And so we're expanding beyond Meridian Township, but and there will be additional Meridian Township solar stories told in the future. But the 4 that have been done so far have been recorded, and Leroy arranged to have them on our YouTube channel. And apparently there are playlists for YouTube, which I didn't realize. So there's a playlist now for Michigan solar stories. And so we are in a position now to, like we talked about earlier, participate in the National Solar Home Tour in October, having a virtual solar tour, because we already have 4 stories, and I'm anticipating that we'll get another 3, 4 stories, 5 stories between now and October. So that's gone pretty well, and I think people participating are getting information, good information out of it, and people do like to talk about their solar systems. Yeah, Leroy, do you have anything?
I just wanted to say, give a hats off to Samantha Deal, who's part of this meeting tonight. She's a new staff person with Home TV, and she helped do the uploading to YouTube, as well as get us ready for this meeting tonight. So she's here, present, listening. Hi, Samantha. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Samantha. And we're on to the green team. Leroy, I guess that's you, right?
Yeah, Aparna's not here tonight. I think she's kind of obsessed with the college prep. But I talked a little bit about our table at the market, which focused on the tree distribution. But we really haven't started the conversation about the recycling initiative yet. That's usually the focus. The other thing is this green network, where we found out there was another green team in Meridian Township. So we kind of joined forces and created this network. And again, that's open to anybody who's interested in participating. That's it.
Thank you, Leroy. Hey, Jim, we're on to land preservation.
Something has happened, but I have to press Alt-A.
Well, I think we can hear you.
Okay, then I don't have to. You can hear me now. Okay.
Yep, we can hear you.
I had something that went across that said I needed to do something. Okay, I wish I could say that we've done something, but our Lamprez has been dead in the water because of COVID. I think we're going to have a meeting next week, but I have yet to have any confirmation of that. For anyone out there, we do have a couple of vacant spots on the committee. So if there's anyone who's interested in land preservation and the things that we've done, you could apply for that, just as we were talking earlier for this commission. Our Emma, our main person, has been working a lot with the Meridian Conservation Corps and trying to get things going. And I've heard we've talked about having her involved with us and our tree planting effort as well. So at this point, other than saying that we're kind of floating, not much to report.
Okay, thank you, Jim. On to planning. Bill.
Yeah, well, the Planning Commission has been meeting. It hasn't had much business. We've been deep in the weeds of the form-based code, the initial district for the Grand River Corridor. It feels to me like there's potentially many aspects of form-based code that could be of interest to the Environmental Commission. But when I dig deep into it, I don't come up with obvious examples. Except in the area of amenities that could qualify a project for waivers. So for example, that could be on the height of buildings or on building setback or on density or on parking or any number of requirements that normally obtain in any zoning district. And at the moment, there are a couple of those amenities that sound very environmental, such as electric vehicle charging stations, impervious surface, and other sorts of aspects of a development project that we would normally think of as having an environmental component. So if I can bleed into the discussion of the sustainable building sort of study group, it feels like one way forward on this discussion is to kind of get that group to be looking carefully at what sort of things are being considered in the form-based code draft, and not only reinforcing those to provide more options for environmentally oriented amenities within the form-based code district, but then also thinking a bit more broadly about when those amenities might also be applicable to, for example, special use permits or multi-use MUPUDs. That gets really wonky really fast, because each time you go into those, you're deep in the ordinances, and if you don't know your way around, it's a little tricky. But I feel like we're making some progress in looking at some national standards that are being provided. Leroy has given us some great links to sort of national standards. And then Rose has also provided us with some early drafts from East Lansing's Commission on the Environment to try to reform East Lansing's code to incentivize more sustainable green environmental practices. So that's kind of the overview of where that discussion is.
Okay, Rose, would you like to add anything about we're into the Sustainable Development Study Group now?
Yeah, well, Leroy sent out the most current draft of what's happening in East Lansing earlier. I don't know if everybody had a chance to take a look at that. But in East Lansing, they were leaning heavily on LEED standards, and the thought, in terms of the incentives that you're talking about, they were looking at LEED standards and kind of making a point system based on LEED standards so that they didn't have to develop their own code or come up with their own incentives. because LEED standards are going to continue to change and evolve over time. And that way it takes the pressure off the planning department to have to update any sort of environmental regulations that they're trying to require. Does that all make sense? So they are leaning all back on LEED, and they're proposing that when developers come in and want to take advantage of these incentives, that they're going to have to either contract somebody who's LEED accredited to review that, or they're going to require that a member of planning staff becomes LEED accredited so that they can oversee that whole program.
Okay, hey, thank you. And Leroy, you may comment on this. I seem to remember from your kind of summary of the meeting that there were kind of two, there was a lot of very good discussion at that Sustainable Development Study Work Group, but it seemed like the consensus was that since we're just starting out kind of looking into this area and there's a lot of possibilities, that we should send out kind of an invitation to the township board, the planning commission, and to others to let them know that we're doing this, and if they have any thoughts to kind of get back to us. And the second thing I believe was that you were going to look into whether the Mid-MEAC green infrastructure audit was appropriate or could be used here in the township. Could you give us an update on those two items?
Yeah, I did hear back from Cliff Walls and also from Teresa Lark. Well, Teresa is with Mid-MEAC, Cliff is with Tri-County Regional Planning Commission, and Cliff is also involved with the East Lansing Commission on the Environment. And he offered his assistance, and Teresa is also interested. They're going through a green infrastructure review with the city of Lansing and their form-based code. And so I think they'll be really good resources. Yeah, so I'm excited about that. If we can draw them in to this discussion. And it's really helpful, again, having Courtney here, both Courtneys, but representative from the board to kind of take this discussion and what you said, John, invite additional input, not just from the board, but the planning staff also potentially could be invited to help research, but they won't do it unless they get a directive from the board, most likely.
Courtney W., I guess you have another message to pass on to the board. Do you need any clarification on kind of what we're asking or talking about?
I have minimized you to about this big on my screen, but I can still hear you. And I can't figure out how to get it bigger. I would be happy to communicate to the board, but I would like some clarification and maybe written. I know the form-based code has been brought up in discussion at the board. It's not necessarily been taken in a necessarily super positive sense, but I think they would be really interested in hearing the environmental side of how this might, add to, our policies and our planning in Meridian Township. So if there's some way you could summarize, John, or put together something that I could speak intelligently to them about all the work that you guys are doing on the Planning Commission, that'd be fantastic.
So yeah, Leroy, is that something you could do?
Sure, I'll run it by our study group.
Yeah.
And
right.
For additional comments. So
sure.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
putting it on my list.
Leroy, could you explain the green infrastructure audit? Are you kind of pursuing that? Do you need anything from us to take it to the next step, or what happens next with the green infrastructure audit, or are we in a holding pattern, or?
Well, this is something that also kind of has to involve staff from not just me, but potentially planning and Department of Public Works. Green infrastructure overlaps a lot of our jurisdictions, but we can certainly do a cursory overview with help from them. They're going to need some some staff input. This is a national green infrastructure audit developed with a Sea Grant and the University of Wisconsin. So it's really well thought out tool, and it's looking at kind of removing barriers to green infrastructure, doing the right thing. And it's an easy to use tool. So I'm thinking that not only is it something that's doable, but will assist with our sustainable development process here.
Well, Lori, if I understand then, this is kind of on your to-do list. Obviously, you're going to need the help of other township staff, but you don't need anything from us to pursue it, do you?
Maybe I'll add it to that memo from Courtney.
Okay.
Memo to Courtney, just as sort of as part of this, where we are with this study group, and inviting additional feedback and involvement as we move forward. So it's not just a project that comes from the Environmental Commission, but if Planning Commission is involved, if the Planning Department is involved, the board is involved, I think there'll be a lot more momentum than just kind of a wish list from the Environmental Commission.
Sounds good. I think we're on to transportation. I think that's you. Oh, yeah, go
Well,
ahead, Bill.
yeah, let me just pick up on that last point a little bit and offer a couple of concrete suggestions. I think we're likely, as we heard earlier, to get a kind of a general thumbs up from the board on this kind of thing. That's very much in keeping with the sort of board policy that we currently have. When it comes to a specific request, the more specific we can be, I think the better. So my suggestion is, first of all, to put the green infrastructure audit on the agenda, not in a month, not in 2 months, but in however many months Mid-MEAC and Tri-County think it's reasonable for them to have something to present. And then I would also ask Mid-MEAC and TCRP to estimate the amount of staff time that they think will be necessary for them to conduct the green audit, so that when we go to the board, we can have a specific request for that amount of staff time from the planning department to be devoted to this exercise, so that we make sure that we get it done by the deadline that we're going to fix. In my experience, deadlines have a kind of a magical quality.
Leroy, is that, do you need any clarification on that? Is that okay?
Yeah, I can definitely put a draft together of a memo and get some more information from Mid-MEAC and Tri-County Regional Planning Commission. So, thanks.
Okay, I think Ned, you're up for transportation, right? Or is that you, Bill? Who's transportation?
I think that's back to me.
Okay.
I spoke with a commissioner yesterday who shall remain nameless, but there's a little bit of frustration that they're one of the last groups to begin meeting virtually. And it really is a little bit concerning, in as much as MDOT is well along in their planning for the M43 reconstruction. And as we learn in the infrastructure business, you get bites at this apple very rarely, right? MDOT resurfaces roads on a decadal basis at best. So any changes that you want to a roadway, if you miss this kind of an opportunity, you miss it for a decade. The specific opportunity I'm pushing for is to think ahead to the connection between phase 1 and phase 2 of the interurban path. Phase 1 coming from Hagedorn and MSU to Foods for Living, and phase 2 going from Foods for Living to Okemos Road to Central Park. And the connection between those two is very important. And one option for accomplishing that connection is a crossing of Grand River on the east side of the railroad overpass at the Campus Hill Apartments. Right now, that's a very dangerous crossing for transit users, and it needs to be a lot safer for eventual trail users. So making sure that that sort of pedestrian crossing is accommodated, just as it was at the Brookfield Plaza, when that portion of M43 was resurfaced. It's a very important moment, I think, and I'm trying to encourage the township to make sure that the Transportation Commission meets and addresses those issues in a timely fashion. Other than that, there's a lot of information on the township's website about road projects. The manager is very committed to making sure that township residents understand that the road millage is being used to repair roads. It's not being frittered away. So you can see information there on all of the grind and repave and resurface and repave and crack filling and all of that stuff is there. So there's a lot of transparency going on. But in terms of setting policy, I think it's very important the Transportation Commission be convened.
Is there how do we encourage that?
I recommend social distancing on 2 wheels.
Yeah. I'm expressing that through this group. I'm expressing that to any township board members who might be in attendance, and anyone else in the audience. I think we let the issue of transportation idle at our peril. Circling back to our discussion earlier of some of the inequities in COVID-19 and multifamily housing, those apartment buildings in our township are built along the transit routes. And how our local transit provider is dealing with this emergency and serving the population of our township, it would be terrible to neglect those issues during this time.
Why, anybody have a friend on the Transportation Commission? Give them a buzz and push them along. And we're on to, last but not least, is trees, our tree committee, and I think that's you, Jim.
Other than the fact that Leroy has been on top of it longer and more intensely than I have, there was a sale, how long ago, Leroy? 2 weeks ago at the farmer's market. Not really a sale, but a tree giveaway, a tree adoption program. And I guess you were able to push off or get adopted 64 trees to a good home within the township. And that's to be commended. And we now just need to try to decide which way we go with any of the rest, well, almost all of the rest of the money that we've been granted by the board, how to best get trees planted. And we're leaning now somewhat, or at least we're thinking about continuing the tree giveaway or tree adoption through the farmer's market. Would you have anything more to add to that, Leroy?
I wanted to say that it was kind of a volunteer effort. It came together. Ingham Conservation District was super helpful with the donation. Both Rose and Phil DeShane offered to help staff a table. One of our core volunteers, in fact, our volunteer coordinator, Ellen Dillman, came through and staffed the entire 4 hours, or 3.5 hours. And so it was a team effort, and we're hoping to do more of that. And appreciate Bill's suggestions as a new member of our tree team and kind of breathing some fire into this initiative, as well as the township board for retaining that in our budget, because I don't think we're going to have any problem spending the $10,000 on a big project this year.
Leroy, is there still something going on with Okemos schools?
Yeah, obviously things are up in the air with fall. I think most of the effort is focused on the, getting the curriculum, getting the teachers, getting the students, getting a plan together for COVID. So I've got a couple of calls into into the schools for Hazlet and Okemos, but that project is not, it's still up in the air. We've identified a couple of probable sites where we could plant 10 to 30 larger trees. The remaining question is how they're going to be maintained, and so that's still in the works, but a possibility.
Sounds good. I think we're up to public remarks, and it's actually an opportunity for any of us to bring up any issue, I guess. But is there anybody outside the board that wants to speak? Has anybody called in or waiting to talk?
No one's called in yet, but we'll give out the number one more time so they have it: 517-349-1232. And of course, if any of the people in the attendee area would like to speak via the Zoom interface, we can have them raise their hand and then enable them to speak directly from there. The raise hand feature should be on their toolbar when they touch their screen or float their mouse over their screen, depending on how they're connecting. That telephone number one last time: 517-349-1232. And I've got a call coming in right now, if you'll bear with me.
Are we supposed to be hearing something?
I think he'll let you know when he makes a connection.
Yeah, it takes a minute.
That's
Okay.
true.
It's a Zoom bomber.
They take over the entire thing if we, if they're. While we're waiting, can I just ask one question with the schools and the tree planting? One of the issues that I've seen is as you walk around the periphery of Cornell School is the amount of landscaping yard waste that is dumped along the periphery of the schoolyard. Is there anything we could do? Suggestions we could make?
Are you sure it isn't compost or?
It isn't a compost, it's just yard waste that's being dumped along the periphery of the school.
Is it's being dumped by the school or by neighbors?
Probably by I'm assuming neighbors.
Oh, okay.
Joining neighbors or just everybody in the whole neighborhood?
I'm going to assume joining. Most likely joining. I doubt that many people are transporting yard waste, multiple, probably adjoining.
Chair Sarver, I apologize. We have the first caller of two who have called in, and if the caller would please state their name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Connie Rabani. I'm a home TV journalist intern. So my question is regarding the tree planting project. I was just wondering, I know this is kind of maybe a silly question, but what inspired the project?
And actually, the public comment isn't really geared very well for two-way dialogue when you're calling in. So I will I'll let the board respond to that, or the commission respond to that after we take the comment from the next person as well, please. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yep, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for waiting. The commission is ready for your public comment. Please begin by stating your name and address for the record.
Okay. My name is Timothy Hammond. I live at 1801 North Hagedorn Road, East Lansing, Michigan, 48823. And the reason I'm calling is I would like to volunteer on one of the boards that you had listed tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hammond, I have your telephone number via caller ID, and I will forward your information to the commission, and they will have someone contact you regarding an application for public service.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir, and have a good evening.
Yep, bye.
Bye. Those are all the calls that we have coming in at this time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Jim or Leroy, do you want to respond to the first question?
I guess I can give it a try. The township board came to us with a wonderful proposal. They voted, this was before COVID, and it's still holding, but they offered us a $10,000 sum from the township board that they set aside for tree planting in Meridian Township, and asked our commission to deal with that.
And one thing I remember when Phil Deshane came to the Environmental Commission was, I mean, there's many good reasons to plant trees, of course, but he did reference the climate sustainability plan, the benefits that come from tree planting with respect to carbon dioxide, removal, and also shading, so people use less energy. And so there's obviously multiple health and aesthetic reasons for doing a tree initiative, but he at least partially put it within the context of the climate sustainability plan, which I was glad to see. Leroy, do you have anything you'd like to add about the origination?
Just to build on what you said, I think Phil and others see this tree planting as a positive action that kids can take, adults, families, neighborhoods can take. There's a lot of negative news about the environment or other world issues that we're facing, and it's a feel-good activity that engages people and communities. And so I think that was sort of one of the heart of this. Feel free to embellish, Courtney, if you like, but that's the sense that I got from Phil.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I agree with you.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our meeting. Would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thanks everybody for participating. We'll be back Zooming next month. And a lot of committees and work groups between now and then. Take care, stay safe.